Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hayatum Sillam and I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And a very happy International Women in Engineering Day to all of you. Thank you so much for joining. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here to today's virtual celebration event to mark INWED 2020. I'm afraid I can't promise that the lunch wherever you are will be as excellent as the lunch that we usually serve to celebrate INWED at our headquarters in Prince Philip House. But we are more than making up for that with our fantastic guest speaker, Dr. Jane Atkinson, Executive Director of Engineering and Automation at Bilfinger UK. If you know Jane already, you will know that she is a bona fide force of nature. And if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet, then you're in for a real treat. But before we get on to that, I have a few housekeeping notices. Now, I cannot direct you as I normally would at this point to our fire exits and our restrooms, but I can invite you to share your experiences from today on Twitter or other social media channels and to use the hashtags which should be displayed on the screen, hashtag #EngDiversity, hashtag INWED20 and hashtag #ShapeTheWorld. And I should also mention that we'll be recording today's event and also invite you to submit questions at any point using the Q&A function, which should be at the right-hand side of your screen. I know that some of you have already submitted questions in advance. Thank you very much if you've done that. But please do add to our question bank during the course of this event, and I'll try to make sure that we cover as many of those with Jane as we possibly can. Right, now, to get us all warmed up and to check the technology is really up and running, we're going to kick off with a couple of quick polling questions. So please have your mouse at the ready. And when I ask the question, you're going to see that polling function pop up. It should be on the lowest section of your screen. You just have to click on it and it should take you to the place where you can give your answer. So, and once you've voted, the icon should disappear. So the first question is there a glass ceiling? And I'm hoping at this point you're going to see this question if you follow your polling icon. And you will see then that you have 4 options in front of you. You can say, yes, there is. You can say, no, there isn't. You can say, you really don't care. Or you can say, it's not glass, it's concrete. We thought being engineering, it was only appropriate we give you a choice of materials. So I hope that you've all found the polling icon and I hope that you are now busy answering it. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to make sure that you've had the chance to give your view. And hopefully very shortly I'll get a bit of a cue that we're good to move on to our second question. I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds more to make sure that you've had the chance to share your view. Is there a glass ceiling? Yes, no, don't care, or it's not glass, it's concrete. I'm looking forward to hearing what you will think of that. Brilliant. So I think that's long enough to let you cogitate on the first question. So we're on to the second question. Now, I'm afraid we lulled you into a false sense of security with our first question. The second question is a bit more technical. So the second question is, according to ONS data, which engineering occupation has the lowest mean average gender pay gap? I'm going to repeat that again. According to ONS data, which engineering occupation has the lowest mean average gender pay gap? So we're looking for the lowest gender pay gap for the engineering occupation. So the 4 options that you should find when you follow your polling icon are electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, production and process engineers. So don't just go out of your natural loyalties, try and have a guess at which you think will have the lowest mean average gender pay gap. And if you've read our recent gender pay gap report, then you've got a better chance than most of coming up with the right answer. So now we have to talk amongst ourselves for a few seconds whilst the numbers are crunched. And hopefully, before too long, we're going to have some results to share with you. We're all becoming world experts on using Zoom, Teams. Even my 8-year-old daughter is ready to get her Zoom diploma. But this is my first time using this particular functionality on this platform, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it's all going to work smoothly and you'll be spared from me having to busk for too long. So we should be nearly there. Fantastic. So I think we are ready to share the results with you. So can we have the results for question 1, please? Oh, look at that. 67% of you said that that you believe there is a glass ceiling. I think you can see all those results for yourself, so I'm not going to read them in great detail. Pretty much all of you do think it matters, so that's interesting. Let's come back to that in the Q&A and let's have the results for question 2. Ooh, well, this one's split the audience. So, the majority of you said that civil engineers have the lowest mean average gender pay gap, and I must say that you are a very well-informed audience, because that is indeed correct. So the mean gender pay gap for civil engineers is minus 5.3%, so it's a negative gender pay gap of 5.3%. And I'm afraid the profession that has the highest, the engineering profession occupation that has the highest mean gender pay gap is electrical engineers at 13.2%. Again, happy to come back to that when we move on to the Q&A after Jane has spoken. Right, well, now that we have those results, that we've broken the ice, let's get on to the main business of today. So I'm going to welcome you all once again to this very special Royal Academy of Engineering event, celebrating female leadership in a changing world. Now, if I'm honest, in some ways celebrating INWED is a little bit bittersweet for me. I am proud of so many features of our engineering community. I've been incredibly fortunate to have forged my career in this community, and I consider it a true privilege to now be in a leadership role in engineering. I have the great good fortune to know so many extraordinary women in the engineering profession and many great leaders of all genders. And really on a daily basis, I'm inspired by those people, by their leadership, by their contributions. But despite this, and despite many, many efforts from individuals, from organisations, including, I'm sure, a number of you here in the virtual room today, over decades to tackle our diversity deficit, it's so disappointing and so frustrating that our progress on diversifying this incredible profession has been so slow. And as you probably know, the latest available stats still show that only 12% of the UK engineering workforce are female, and only 9% are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And I'm sure that you all agree that this matters tremendously. It matters for engineering because the evidence is now irrefutable that diverse teams and inclusive cultures deliver better outcomes, better business outcomes. It matters for the people in the underrepresented groups who are being denied rewarding careers. They're being restricted in those opportunities. And it matters for all of society because engineers play profoundly important roles in shaping the world that we live in. But this year's INWED, of course, is taking place in a year different from any other. And I'm quite happy to say that I lacked the imagination to envisage how dramatically our life could be changed in just a few short months. I think it's very apposite that the theme of this year's INWED is Shape the World, because like every other disruptive event of this scale, every other major crisis, how we respond to this pandemic will shape whether the disruption that's been caused by COVID ends up reinforcing or reducing inequality. I'm sure, like me, you've seen with concern the data that women are bearing the brunt of extra childcare and housework and are losing jobs in greater numbers than men. A report by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the UCL Institute of Education found that mothers were 47% more likely to have permanently lost their job or quit since the start of the crisis compared to other groups. That's not true for everyone, of course. Experiences are different. For some women and others with caring responsibilities, the whole-scale embracing of flexibility in terms of how, where, when we work has been a game changer, and it provides a potential, if we seize it, if we respond to it appropriately, for a more level playing field to emerge from this crisis. I'm sure, like me, you're also acutely aware that not all groups in society have been equally impacted by the virus itself. The differential impact on those from black and minority ethnic groups has rightly become a source of increasing alarm, and the Black Lives Matter movement has brought issues of racism and inequality to all of our front doors. We have data to show that this is an issue for engineering as much as anywhere else, whether that's in terms of the differential experience of black and minority ethnic engineers in the workplace, or in the differential progression of black and minority engineering graduates into the workplace compared to their white counterparts. And I'd particularly like to give a shout out here to the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers, who we've partnered with over many years and who have been working tirelessly for more than a decade to raise awareness of this issue, and are now working directly with their member employers on action plans and helping them to really engage in a meaningful way with the voices, perspectives and experience of their black and minority ethnic employees. There's a well-known saying, never waste a good crisis. And against the incredible human, social, economic cost that the coronavirus pandemic has wrought, that may sound a bit trite, but I really believe that if we don't act with fierce and fulsome determination to extract the maximum benefit from what we've learned during this crisis, then we will be doing a disservice to all those who've suffered the worst of its impacts. And in the context of engineering, for me, that must include a commitment that this crisis will mark a turning point for progress on diversity and inclusion. And the features of our response to the pandemic to date that I believe could help us with that include the following. The much more extensive, sophisticated and mainstream technology-enabled remote and flexible working we've seen. The greater awareness of mental health and well-being amongst employers, and the pressures that are facing those with caring responsibilities really being seen in a much more obvious way. The stronger focus on resilience as a key attribute for an organisation, which is fundamentally dependent on having diversity of thought. You just can't achieve resilience without diversity. The greater collective acknowledgement that racism and structural inequality exist in the UK, and that we have a shared responsibility to tackle it. And the proof points that we've created for ourselves, all of us, about our collective ability, not least in engineering, to drive radical innovation at scale by deep collaboration, by raising our ambition and aligning behind a common goal that we all believe in. And finally, I think the crisis has also shown us just how crucial engineers are to all of our lives. The new Academy strategy is focused on the notion of engineering in the service of society, and gosh, we've seen that in spades over these past few months. Engineers from all genders and backgrounds have played crucial parts in the fight against COVID-19. From ventilator manufacture to rapid hospital building, from modelling space planning to developing anti-infection coatings for surfaces, to maintaining our critical national infrastructure, to developing the tools for remote working that are all now powering our lives. Engineers are among the many heroes of this pandemic, and over the next few months at the Academy we'll be publicly celebrating, shouting about their contributions. Showing that engineering is a human-centric profession where you can make a real difference to people's lives is also one of the things we're going to have to do much more of, much better, to attract a new generation into engineering. And as many of you know, we've been running our This is Engineering campaign at the Academy in partnership with many others, including lots of you represented around the table today. The Perceptions campaign is trying to get rid of outdated and narrow stereotypes of engineering so that more people from more backgrounds will see a future for themselves in these incredible careers. And our latest batch of films focuses on the concept of Be the Difference. Let's see a taster of the campaign. Great, I hope you enjoyed that. There's lots more of that on our This is Engineering website, and I'm delighted that the This is Engineering campaign videos have now been viewed over 40 million times by a gender-balanced audience of UK teenagers. And I hope that many of you will also join us in celebrating our second This is Engineering Day on the 4th of November this year. It's a great opportunity to come together to show what modern engineering is all about, to show the difference it makes to all of our lives, and to show the diversity of faces, voices, backgrounds of the engineers who are playing their part in shaping our future. Well, we're going to have loads more opportunity to talk about INWED, to talk about diversity, and that's going to come in the Q&A session shortly. But before that, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jane Atkinson to all of you. Jane is a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and she's currently Executive Director of Engineering and Automation at Bilfinger UK. She's an expert in iron and steel and is renowned for having increased the output of all the plants she's been responsible for, including the UK's first commercial biomass boiler. She's won many awards, including the CBI's First Woman Award in Manufacturing and the prestigious Stevenson Award from the Worshipful Company of Engineers for inspiring young people to follow careers in science and engineering. And last year, she was named the most influential woman in engineering by the FT and Inclusive boards. So we're going to be in great hands today. Jane, it's absolutely brilliant to have you here. Please give us your take on female leadership in a changing world. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Hayatam, and thanks for the introduction. Today's business has never been more challenging for women in leadership roles. Understanding your own leadership style will help you develop quicker. So in reality, what I'm saying to you is look at develop your strengths and don't concentrate on your weaknesses, which is a traditional approach actually to personnel development. So I'm going to tell you a few stories of events that have shaped my leadership style and that have helped me get to where I am today. But let me explain first my own style, and hopefully as I'm talking you'll see those traits coming through. So when I started my career in the 1990s at British Steel, the general leadership style of the people around me was dominant, aggressive and extremely transactional. During this time there were 4 women out of 1,700 men on site. And in order to survive this very male, macho environment, you had to be aggressive and stand up for yourself and not allow yourself to be intimidated or bullied. Although I could and I did act like that, it wasn't my natural style. My own personality is more inclusive and persuasive, particularly when I've got data because I am an engineer at heart. So this style that I developed required a lot of energy and was exhausting. But at the time it was the right thing to adopt. Being a minority, everyone was watching and waiting for me to fail. So if I made a mistake, everybody knew. So I quickly realised I was actually a role model and I had to behave as such. So gradually through my early career, my style began to develop from this highly transactional approach to a more transformational style. Although I have to say it's probably only in the last 10 years that I can truly say it's transformational. So let me tell you a few stories now, and I'll come back to what is a transformational leader. So like I said, after graduation, I worked at British Steel. My first real responsible job was at the blast furnace. And at the age of 23, I became the first woman in the world to manage a blast furnace. I had a team of shift workers, all men, working for me. And my job was to make sure that the blast furnace was continually tapped of iron. If the furnace went down, the whole site couldn't make steel, and it was £1 million a day cost. The environment was really, really harsh. 1700 degrees C, liquid iron was pouring on runners that you had to walk across. Flames and sparks were the norm. The men were tough, and one guy wouldn't even talk to me because he didn't believe a woman should do the job. I found that the younger guys were quite aggressive, but the older guys were very supportive. So earning respect was actually quite difficult, but I got there as a result of an incident. And one day, one of my shift team guys was in a bobcat. Liquid iron flew out of the runners and just overflowed and surrounded him. His tyres caught fire. So I just ran to the edge of the pool. My boots were alight, flames were everywhere, and I reached out. I managed to grab him. I pulled him safely and we landed. And at the time we wore quick release boots, so I managed to fling my boots off and away from us. But that incident was my greatest opportunity. And even though I was classed as management, I'd mucked in, I'd helped, which earned me respect. The guy who wouldn't speak to me, after 2 years, still didn't speak to me. But I understood that it was his problem and not mine. So after 3 years, I was promised my first middle management position. The company was restructuring and I was tipped off I was going to get a good role. At the same time, a job was posted on the internal job board for a job commissioning a plant in Alabama, USA. On a whim, I applied. And within 3 days, I was asked to attend an interview by video link. Now, this was in 1997, and it was the first time I'd ever done a video conferencing. I mean, it's not like it is today. You had to go into a separate room that was set up, ready for you. Anyway, needless to say, I got the job. But they wanted me out there within 7 days to start commissioning. So I went to tell my boss, and he really wasn't happy. And he raised it with the works manager, who was the most senior person on the site. So the works manager called me into his office, and he said to me, if I took the job, I'd never be allowed to work for him again, and I would never be allowed to work at Teesside again. So I was really, obviously I was upset. And I thought about it overnight, and then I went to see him the next morning and said, look, I want to go. So I packed my bags and went to the US, and I went to commission a plant that was originally built in Scotland 20 years ago. It had been dismantled into 28,000 pieces, shipped across the Atlantic to Mobile, Alabama, and my job was to commission it, start it up and operate it. My boss had played no part in the interview, so I turned up to the plant on the first day, And my boss, Hussein, said to me, "You're a girl. I will not have any girls working for me. I only think they're good at admin." Luckily, the MD was with me who'd interviewed me and had a few strong words with Hussein. So for 6 months, the relationship was extremely tense. We fought a lot. But I worked extremely hard and I did everything an ops manager should do to get accepted. And then another incident occurred. So a hurricane was coming in. We had 24 hours notice and the government had issued a mandatory evacuation. Hussein needed volunteers to protect the plant. Our insurance company insisted that we'd have people still with the plant. So we sat in the morning meeting 24 hours before the hurricane landed and decided who would stay with the plant. I was the only single person in the room, so I volunteered, but Hussein would have none of it. I was a girl. I didn't have the physical strength if I got trapped or if anything fell on me. And that day, it was not the time or the place to argue. Instead, one of my shift guys, he volunteered to stay with the plant. So I said I'd go and sit with his family with a site radio so that we could all communicate. I worked on that site for 3 years, and in the end, Hussein told me that he would actually consider employing another female in operations. So I took that as a compliment. But I then moved to a place in northern Alabama, to a place called Tuscaloosa, to another plant that was having difficulties. They had a technical issue that resulted in high rejections, and it was costing a fortune. But the problem wasn't new. They'd had this problem for 10 years, and they'd had some really clever people looking at it. But the MD of the business asked me, could I come and have a look and try and solve it? It took me 8 months to solve that problem. But I did it by listening to the workforce, because actually they knew what was going wrong. They understood what was happening. They actually understood the root cause, but they couldn't articulate it and they couldn't solve it themselves. So through a slow process of making really small changes and doing some trials, we resolved the problem. And in the end, as a reward, the MD gave me the plant to manage, and I got my first plant manager's role. So let's come back to my leadership style. I said that I was slowly becoming a transformational leader. And although Hussein wasn't a very good role model, he did give me an opportunity that I was determined to make a success, even though I still had to use that aggressive management style. At Tuscaloosa, my transformation leadership style started to achieve results. Now, a transformational leader achieves results by sharing a vision with their employees and creating that need and drive for change. Then through teamwork, creating the right environment and actually delegating tasks on strengths, that improves motivation, job satisfaction, and hopefully improves morale and solves problems. And I did that by listening to the guys, involving the guys in the trials and telling them what I wanted to achieve at the end of each trial. We celebrated the successes together and we commiserated the failures together. But unbeknown to me, that at the time, that achievement stood me in good stead for the rest of my career. After working in America for 5 years, I moved back to British Steel, which was then Chorus, as a senior manager. Interestingly enough, I went back to Teesside. I did a further 2 years in iron and steel, and then I moved into the power generation sector for a company called Semcorp. By then I came with a credibility and a perceived talent as a problem solver. So after accepting the job, whilst I was working my notice still at Chorus, I get a phone call from the MD. Could I go and have coffee with him, for the MD of my new company? So I went over and met him, and he said to me, I'm really curious to meet you because I'm flabbergasted that one of my exec team recruited a girl in operations. I'll tell you what, I nearly resigned there and then. But I did start, and on the first day I walked into the power station control room, and one of the guys said to me, what does a girl know about running a power station? I said, I don't, but I know how to manage men, so shut up and get on with it. But the role was really hard. Plant availability was low, but due to a contract with another power station, we were importing steam, and we were making £40 million a year. So no one saw the need to improve the plant. However, in 2 years' time, that contract was due to expire, and we had to be able to stand up on our own 2 feet. And I knew unless we did something, it would be a disaster. So I launched a reliability program. The exec thought I was mad. They were focusing on building more assets, and didn't see a need to improve the reliability or the availability of the old ones. But in 9 years of my tenure, I improved the reliability of the coal boilers by 50%. We saved £6.3 million per annum by doing that. But I also built a gas turbine. I built and commissioned the UK's first biomass boilers. And by the end of it, I closed down the coal boilers. But the same guy who asked me about my ability to run a power station acknowledged that I really did in the end. And I also got my first executive role and became a board member of that company. So after 20 years in operations, I was headhunted to go into a contracting sector, where I moved to a company called Cape Industrial Services. Initially, I was in charge of scaffolding, insulation and painting for blue chip companies such as EDF, SABIC, AstraZeneca, all across England. But after 18 months, I became statutory director of their technical division, which included companies such as Motherwell Bridge and York Linings. What I did was I built tanks, gas holders, heat exchangers, as well as providing refractory and chemical cleaning across the globe for Cape. And then in 2018, Cape was bought out by an entrepreneur called Mohad Altrad. And he decided to merge the 3 UK businesses together, and I decided to volunteer to do it. It took 9 months to merge those 3 businesses. We eventually became the single largest industrial provider in the UK at £600 million a year turnover. But what I had to do was reduce overheads by over £10 million. I merged several legal entities together, launched and designed a new ERP system without any disruption to day-to-day activities. But whilst nearing the end of this, I was headhunted again by my current employer, Bilfinger. So Bilfinger is a £4.5 billion German company, and I'm responsible for design, engineering, automation, digital, fabrication and major projects in the UK. So I've told you just a few of those stories that have shaped me into who I am today and how my leadership style has changed. But the one thing that I will say is that in parallel to my work, I've always volunteered to sit on committees and trustee boards of different institutions and charities. And the reason why I do this is not only to give back, but also to learn how other sectors operate. And over the years, this has brought me some key insights, and I've been able to cross-fertilise strategies into my own business. So I urge you to volunteer for these organisations. So how does all that I've told you relate to women's leadership style in a changing world? Well, there's been a study done called the Caliper study in the US, and it identifies 4 specific statements about female leadership qualities. It says, women are more persuasive than their male counterparts. When feeling the sting of rejection, women leaders learn from adversity, and they carry on with, I'll show you attitude. Women leaders demonstrate an inclusive team-building leadership style of problem-solving and decision-making. And women leaders are likely to ignore the rules and take risks. So when I look back on my career and how I behave today, I'm pleased to say and proud to say I'm a stereotypical female leader. But what are the simple takeaways or advice that I will give you today? The key message is that before you can lead, you have to have credibility and you have to earn respect. I call it earning my stripes. Being technically competent doesn't make you a good leader or automatically establish respect. My role models have been non-existent in my job, but I found a few over the years outside my sector. What I did realise very early on that I myself was a role model. And as I was the first, whatever I did set precedent. In my early career, I took a lot of opportunities from crises and incidents. So I would say to you, don't run away from them, embrace them and volunteer. Not letting people get to you, having confidence in yourself is so important. You need to be tenacious. It's really easy to say, but really difficult to do, so don't give up. I've always been a minority, but putting people at ease, laughing at myself, joining in, breaks down barriers. Being a minority does give an advantage. For me, gender pay gaps haven't really been an issue, but they do exist. It's important to stand up for yourself. Ask. People can only say no. If you think you're owed a pay rise, ask for it. Believe me, they will be more embarrassed than you will be. Changing sectors and industries is quite easy. Don't be afraid. If you're confident, willing to listen, and you can apply it to anything, anywhere. As I progress through the hierarchy of my businesses, My leadership style is less hands-on and more delegation. But believe me, if I'm asking someone to do something, I make sure I understand it myself. I still see the odd sexist behaviour, but I either address it straight on or I just ignore it. If you are a good leader, people will follow you, and your sex will not influence this. Learn from the people around you and listen. The world will continue to evolve and change, but those fundamentals still apply. Many thanks, and I wish you all the best.
Jane, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us. That was absolutely phenomenal, and I must say, quite eye-opening. I'm afraid I was oblivious to some of the, I would say, more prehistoric behaviours that you've had to encounter in your career. There's lots that I want to talk to you about. We've got some questions coming in on the Q&A function. Please, everyone, do keep adding to that question bank. So we'll come to those questions in a minute, but I'm just going to kick off with a few of my own, if that's okay. So first of all, one thing I've always been struck by whenever I bump into you is that you've got this extraordinary positivity and sort of energy about you. And is that just because I happen to only ever see you on days when you've had your Weetabix, other cereals are available, or is it a natural quality that you have? And do you think that's an important part of your leadership style?
If you ask my husband, I'm very grumpy on a morning, and Monday mornings are not good in the office, so I'm not normally like that. But I do think being positive, a couple of things on being positive. First of all, when you are the only one there, people are looking at you at all the time, so it's really important to show positivity. But as you go up and start getting, start becoming a leader and start managing teams, it's actually really important because your environment, your atmosphere, your attitude rubs off to your team. And the other thing is you want your team to be successful. You're only as good as the team that you've got around you. And if you're worrying about something and you're giving them something to worry about, and particularly in an environment like today, people are afraid of their jobs. Yeah. You've kind of got to give them more confidence and help them with that. So not share your woes and worries. Now, what I will say is I do tell the guys straight up. I tell all my team exactly what's happening, etc. But try not to put the worry down. Try and keep hold of it. Yeah. So being positive is actually really quite important.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. I think it's important to be realistic, but actually recognising that leadership means people do look to you to give them the confidence and the courage to say, yes, we can do this, is really important. And that growth mindset is part of leadership as well. I'm hoping you can hear me okay, Jane. Are you all right there with your
I'm having
technology?
A bit of struggle, but yeah, I think
you can just about hear me.
I'm okay now.
Excellent, we're going to struggle on. So my second question is that you were the youngest female fellow ever elected to the Royal Academy of Engineering when you were elected back in 2010. And you've told us about the experience of being the first woman in the world to manage a blast furnace at the age of 23. Do you think that achieving a lot at a young age has had an impact on your experience, perhaps alongside or compounding with your gender? Or actually has that not been something that you've particularly thought about in your career?
I don't think I've really thought about it. It's just been part of my career. I'm just very lucky to have had those opportunities at an early age. I think it's made me stronger. It's made me more resilient having it early on. And that one phrase when I said to you about the guy who wouldn't speak to me, or really understanding it's his problem and not mine, has really helped me through my career.
So you touched on the word resilience there, and actually, of course, resilience is a topic that has really come to the fore in terms of thinking both about what organisations have to seek to achieve in the current context, but also in terms of how to be a resilient leader. As a leader, you have your knocks and bumps along the way. I'm interested in your own experiences of how you've dealt with those times when you felt less kind of bulletproof, less up for the struggle. Have you had any low points? How have you dealt with that? And what do you do to foster that resilience in yourself and in the teams that you're responsible for?
Yes, I mean, it is quite interesting. I do think I've had a very good family unit around me. My mum and dad were very supportive, and my husband is today. And I think that's really important, although I have a tendency to probably bottle up work and I don't bring work home with me. It's knowing that I've got those people behind me supporting me. I think it all comes back to your own sort of morals and ethics. I truly believe if you think you're doing right, carry on doing it. And I think that is really, really important. I mean, I've had some horrendous experiences. I did choose a few of them today to talk to you. But very early on, I had a stalker, and the police got involved, and that really scared me. And but that actually made me realise that, you know, I had to be careful when I was in the workplace. You know, I had to understand that I was walking into an environment that they weren't used to having women in. So I had to make them as comfortable as well as me. And even today, I mean, I am positive, I'm full of energy, but some days I don't want to walk into a room full of men, you know, in a black tie conference. Some days I have to really, really talk to myself and say, come on, you can do it. And everybody has those feelings. Sometimes you just got to say, I'm going to go and do it.
Yeah, and I think that the point you made about the sort of, I call it the equation. The equation is not just what your job is and where you get satisfaction in your job and the relationships in your work, but also what goes on outside work. And that equation has to balance. So finding ways to make sure that you do feel that ability to get emotional support when you need it, and all of that helps to make the stresses and strains of the workplace you know, easier to endure at the time when it's more of an issue. And what about teams? I mean, this is a really tough time in industry. You know, there are pressures on companies like never before. So when you are acutely aware of those commercial realities, the competitive pressures, and you need high-performing teams, how do you also foster that sense of well-being in the team and make sure that they are resilient at a personal level when there's probably a lot going on in their personal lives as well as the many demands of the workplace?
I mean, that's really quite interesting. I mean, especially at the moment in the current environment. I mean, our business, you know, we have between 2,500 and 3,000 people on an annual basis working for us, and we furloughed 1,300 people during this period. And you know, a lot of people were very worried, and my direct team, my senior management team, were very worried about the long-term impact, both on their teams and on themselves. And I think it's really important to understand what is going on in their personal life. They may not want to share it with you, but that, you know, there is a way of being interested, supporting. You know, everybody flexible works in some way, some form. So by supporting that and helping them, I think it's really important. And again, it's about trust in that relationship that you have with your team. You know, I know that my team will work hard for me. So there are times when, you know, you have to be tolerant. You know, family does impact on work, and just understanding that and helping them, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, uniquely difficult time in that respect. You mentioned as well in your comments that whilst you hadn't really had, unfortunately, female role models in your industry that you could have looked up to and aspired to you know, emulate or draw on for their leadership style, you said that you had seen examples beyond your industry which you'd felt inspired you. You know, the theme of this year's INWED is Shape the World. Who are those other people who've helped shape the world that you see as sources of inspiration, role models, whatever you want to call it?
It's quite interesting because I actually have a lot of role models that are men as well as women. I mean, people laugh about Margaret Thatcher, but actually take a step back, ignore politics. She was an amazing figure. She might not have done it right in some people's opinion, and you know, and some of the decisions she took, you know, a huge impact. But actually, what a brave woman and what a strong woman. So she's, you know, she's kind of the forefront of it all. But you know, I found a lot of role models in you know, ex-colleagues, and most of them aren't engineers actually. You know, a HR director. I have a friend, she's very high up in the CBI, and just having that network of people as well to rely on when you think you're doing something and that you want to talk through it with somebody, is speaking to them. So actually people outside of my sector and my industry have been very, very important to me.
Well, that's great, and we've got lots of questions coming in on the app, so I'm going to draw on those in just a minute, but I've got just a couple more I want to squeeze in before we move to those. One of the things that you highlighted in your really interesting presentation, Jane, was in a way, how fearless you've been in seizing opportunities that might have looked a bit inhibiting, and been happy to embrace change. And you talked about that, don't be afraid of change. But I often, when I talk to younger colleagues, or sometimes people who are, same sort of age range as me, one of the hardest things to do is to work out what's a good opportunity. So sometimes when you look at an opportunity, you'll feel, gosh, am I taking too big a risk? How do I know if this is the right thing for me at this stage? We don't have the sort of structured careers that people used to. And I think it's really, really tough on individuals to sort of navigate their own career path these days. What's been behind your decisions? How have you convinced yourself it was the right thing to do at that particular moment in your career?
I suppose, to be honest, when you've asked me that, I don't really know. I mean, it's quite interesting because there's been, when I went to work in America, the reason why I wanted to go was I wanted to work abroad. So that was ticking a box for me. Yeah. When I volunteered to do the integration and became the transformation director for Altrad, the reason why I did that was actually it was going to be interesting. I was going to enjoy it, and I knew everybody who was involved, and I could make some really good and interesting decisions. So, and I've always had I always have a phrase to myself that says, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I have a tick list of about, in 5 years' time, what I want to do. And if those opportunities allow me to tick one of those things off, I think go for it. I think the biggest thing that stops people is financial security. And I can really understand that. So I think it's really important to understand, the transformation leadership piece that I did for Altrad. Actually, effectively, I was doing myself out of a job. And yet the MD said to me at the end of it, Jane, you will always have a job in this business. Actually, by the end of it, I didn't want a job in the business. Mm-hmm. So, and that was quite, have I got a job to go to? And then that comes down to, for me, the biggest benefit that I've had in my career has been networking. Network. So that, those opportunities do come to you. Headhunters come to you. Senior leaders come to you and ask you your opinion and to help. So that's the one piece that I'd say has helped me throughout my career.
That's fantastically helpful, and again, it resonates with my own experience. Those relationships are so key on multiple levels, and it just feels good to be part of a community as well, doesn't it? The last issue I want to touch on before I go and draw in some of the fantastic questions that are coming on the app is you're at the heart of what's happening with what's often called Industry 4.0, the convergence of cyber-physical systems, the wave of technology change that's sweeping through industry. And I'm interested in your thoughts about what both the opportunities and potential risks are from the perspective of diversity inclusion, and what we can and should be doing, whether it's as individuals, as organisations, as a profession, to maximise the potential upside from a diversity perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting on Industry 4.0. What I've found is a lot of my clients don't understand what it is, and they're trying to understand what it is. And actually, when you look at and remember, sort of my clients are big industrial sort of clients, so we're talking cement plants, we're talking food and beverage, we're talking process plants. And a lot of these assets are at least 30 years old in a lot of cases, and they're not ready for Industry 4.0. Actually, they've got a lot of obsolescence in their instrumentation, and the way it's all connected. And also the macro environment doesn't help because there's a lot of HSE legislation. We can't have instruments and data going up into the cloud. It is a security issue, but also it's a vulnerability for the plant. So we're spending a lot of time educating our clients on where they are in that journey, because it's a journey, and how they can get there. And I think it is quite interesting because as an engineer, there is a lot of work moving forward for engineering to help people get to sort of the place where we want to be with Industry 4.0. But we're seeing a lot of IT people coming into the arena because it's, obviously, it's not only about instrumentation and data and big data, but it's also, you know, the IT element of it. So we need to push those people out, the IT guys. Engineers need the work. So there's a lot of work coming up. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, we just need a lot more intelligent, clever people and engineers, and there's huge opportunities. But it's trying to attract people into the sector. You know, This Is Engineering is an absolute brilliant campaign. We need to attract more diversity into the sector, full stop. And it's really important. And we're seeing all the good signs, all the stuff coming through at schools, etc. But we need to bring them and pull them in and make the industry sexy and interesting.
Absolutely. And one of the opportunities I see is because we have this changing set of skills needs across industry as a result of Industry 4.0. Actually, we are going to be having to invest in skills development. We are going to be having to support people to reskill, to upskill. And so if we try to use that as an opportunity to enrich the diversity of people who are then equipped to do those jobs, that's a real win. And I know there is work going on in that area, but there's still a huge amount to do. I would love to keep talking about this stuff, but I should take some questions from our fantastic audience. So I'm going to read them out. Where I've got a name to refer to, I will. Apologies if I'm not referring to you correctly. I'm doing my best. So we've got a question from Rhonda Topaz. What is the one piece of advice that you've been given that stuck with you throughout your career, perhaps that you think about regularly or that you pass on to others?
So the one thing is, nobody's going to help you but yourself. So you've got to think about yourself and really, really push. So the things about asking for a pay rise, you know, I went and did that 10 years ago. I went to my boss and said, I think I deserve a pay rise. And by the way, I know, you know, my peers I'm getting less than my peers. And actually, he was really embarrassed. And I got one, and actually I got a really good one. It was like, well, why hadn't I done that myself before? So that's the one piece of advice, you know. No one else is going to look after you but yourself.
And any specific hints for people who are thinking about potentially approaching their boss and asking for a pay rise?
The biggest one is, for me, take the role profile out, have a look at it, and make sure you're doing everything on it, and then they've got no argument.
I mean, I think your point around sort of self-reliance and self-knowledge, I think it can sound a bit intimidating to people, but actually it's massively empowering because you know yourself better than anybody. If you really understand what you have to offer and you really think about what's going to be right for you, it gives you that sense of ownership and it's empowering actually. And I often share that advice with other people as well. The thing that's been most useful for me, I think, in my career has been knowing my strengths and weaknesses and sort of almost self-observing how I'm dealing with the situations I'm in. And it means that, yes, you can draw on input and insight from others, but you can always calibrate it against actually what's right for you. I often say, ask for advice, but feel free to ignore it if it doesn't feel right for you. Yeah. Next question, especially if the person who's giving it doesn't have the leadership style you aspire to, but that's a whole other story. So another question is, you've shared some challenging experiences over the years of your career. I wondered if you'd ever seen any men step in, operating as what we now call allies, to neutralise the situation or challenge it or support you, which is a really good question. Have you had any of those? And if you haven't, maybe you could give us some examples of what you think could or should be happening.
I believe I have. I think I've had quite a few supporters over the years, and I think finding someone that will support you that's more senior than you really helps you, because they will encourage you, they will develop you, they will give you that confidence, and they can coach you and mentor you. So throughout my career, probably in every job I've had somebody like that. How do you find somebody like that is quite difficult, but they're the people who are interested in you, they're the people that will talk to you, they're the people that you can bounce things off. So finding that good ally at a senior level will help you in your career.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's quite a lot of discussion these days about the difference between a kind of, a mentor and a sponsor. And the idea is that a mentor might be someone you have a private chat with and, they share some perspectives that are helpful. But a sponsor is somebody who'll bat for you at a senior level in the organisation, who will advocate for you, make sure that, opportunities that arise, you're suitable for, you get that opportunity to pursue. And I think it is an important difference. It's a difference between a sort of almost a more passive, personal type of relationship and somebody who's professionally advocating and supporting for you. And I think those people can be of any gender. I don't think it necessarily has to be that it's someone in a majority group, but they just have to be senior enough for that to make a difference. Right, another question. Oh gosh, this is for both of us. Each of you are a leader and in a position of influence. You can do things others can't. How are you leveraging your leadership to drive faster progress on diversity and inclusion? Well, I think since I've got the prerogative of chair, I'm going to ask you to answer that one first, Jane, and then I'll come in with my thoughts. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just thinking quickly. It's interesting, isn't it? Because particularly when I'm interviewing for senior roles, I try not to be unconsciously biased, but I probably am a bit because I want more women in the sector. And so when I'm trying to interview, I look at promoting or talking to women or minorities or anything. I just want people with different views and coming from different sectors. That's really, really important to me. The issue is I'm not getting the people applying in the first place. So actually it's very rare that I've got the ability to influence the diversity strategy. What I will say is, again, and it all comes down to the role model piece as well, by being a role model and people seeing that you're making a difference, it opens up everybody else's attitude and behaviour, that they will bring in more women, there will be more, diversity in the workplace, because it's just really important. So, I spend a lot of time not only going into schools and talking to children and trying to get more into the pipeline of engineering, but I speak to, I walk into a room and I'm there representing not only my company, but I'm representing women in engineering, and I could challenge any man in a room on specific subjects, and I think that's just really important. And I just think it'll just open up opportunities for other women and more diverse workforce.
Yeah. So I guess my response would be that I suppose my whole role as somebody who is active on the topic of diversity and inclusion is directly linked to the point at which I found myself in leadership roles. So I come from a really mixed ethnic background. Most of my experience growing up was very much trying to minimise the sense of being different, trying not to talk about it or draw attention to it, to look like I really fitted in like everybody else. And I didn't have any clue I was doing this. It just became, a natural state for me. And the only thing that changed that was when I started to become more senior, and I realised, gosh, if I'm constantly not making apologies, but not choosing to call out something that is inappropriate or making somebody in the room feel uncomfortable, then I make it harder for people that I'm responsible for to feel that they are being respected, that they are being treated in an inclusive and respectful way. And that's the point at which I thought, okay, whatever came naturally to me is not what I'm going to keep following. And I consciously really started thinking, I'm going to make sure that I do become more vocal, that I do talk more actively about the experience of being different, and try and draw on that empathy that comes from being very aware that not everyone in the room feels the same way that you do. I'm going to try and leverage that to do something useful. So particularly when I was appointed CEO of the Academy, I really, really try to make the most of the fact that I don't look the way people expect for someone doing this job. So I found it deeply uncomfortable to talk about the sort of, what happens under the bonnet, the internal workings, how you really feel whatever's going on in your kind of professional front. So exposing that was something that I felt was helpful, because by talking about my personal experience and perhaps just challenging stereotypes, that could be a way to leverage the fact that I was now in a leadership role and not coming from the background or looking the way that people who'd done those roles previously did. And now I suppose, the Academy has a diversity and leadership, diversity and inclusion leadership programme for the whole of the engineering profession. And the thing I keep doing is self-challenging. So trying to say, well, I've got a voice, so I can push harder, I can be more challenging. it's harder as well if you call out someone in the majority group. If you come from a minority, it has extra resonance. So I keep trying to self-challenge. Am I doing enough? Are we being ambitious enough? And the answer is nearly always no. But I guess it's trying to work out how you bring people with you, because if you go too far, you risk alienating people. You risk not getting the systemic change that we want. So to do that in a way actually that's also inclusive of the fact that there are many different perspectives within the engineering profession. People have different levels of comfort and experience at dealing with diversity and inclusion issues, but not letting that desire to bring people with you hold you back at the same time. So I am sure that people will have many comments on things that the Academy is not yet doing well enough, and I would probably be saying the same things to myself, and the team at the Academy would probably be also in that same set of continuous improvement mindset challenges. So self-challenge, having humility, and just keeping on pushing. Are we doing enough? What more can we do? Those are the things that go through my head when we're looking at how we're playing our part in leadership in this area. So from Lucy, what's been your biggest challenge to improve gender balance at your organisation? So you touched on recruitment there. Is that the area that you would pick out, Jane, or do you see something else that's an even bigger barrier?
It is, but also I think the women that I have brought in at different levels within the organisation, coaching and mentoring and helping them develop as well has been really, really important, both to me and to those individuals, because, I really would like them to learn from the mistakes that I've made, so they don't make them as well, and get them up the sort of career ladder faster than I did. So that coaching and mentoring, and making sure that they have mentors that are not only female or from a diverse background, but have mentors that are outside of engineering, because that's really important as well, just learning from other people's experiences.
Absolutely. Question from Benita, and she's asking you what you would do differently with hindsight, because your honesty will only help people kind of experience the reality of what it's like to step up.
So it's really interesting what you said earlier, Hayes. I never wore a skirt to work until I was mid-30s. And the reason being is, again, I wanted to fit in. And, I wore trouser suits, etc. Now, I always wore face paint and I always wore lipstick. But I tended to dress down a bit. And the reason being, again, is I kind of didn't want to always be seen to be different. I wanted to blend in. And in hindsight, I actually think I should not have done that. And why did I do it? I did recognise I was walking into a very male environment, and some men that you think had an issue with you actually turned out they were actually shy, because they've not worked with a female and didn't know how to react. And so once I realised that was happening, I wanted to make them feel comfortable, and I felt comfortable if I kind of just dressed in trousers, etc. So I think I would never have done that in hindsight, because actually it's about celebrating yourself being different, but it's about making them and you feel comfortable as well. So I think there is a balance.
Yeah, well, thank you for your honesty, and I think I call it being unapologetically me, a sort of summary of what that feeling is, but I think lots of people will recognise that. So the next, I've got two sort of related questions from Liz and Helen, and I guess asking you, have you got any advice on how to deal with a person who thinks girls can't do this job? And what do you take into consideration when deciding whether to ignore or call out sexist behaviour?
On the former, these days now I would sit down and ask them, why do they think a female can't do the job? I think myself, you've got to recognise that we're not as physically strong in some aspects, and it's and I think by recognising, again, it's about recognising your strengths and the weaknesses, and whether it's strengths and weaknesses of the opposite sex, or whether it's your own personal strengths and weaknesses. I think you need to sit down with the individual, You need to talk. And if you can't sit down with the individual, speak to your boss and try and facilitate that. They may still have that opinion. Full stop. You'll never be able to change them. And just remember, it's their problem and not yours. Shouting out sexist behaviour is quite interesting. Do I choose to ignore it or do I address it? I would say I address it 99% of the time. I think sometimes we can go too far, and it's recognising when it's appropriate or not to address it, and in which forum. So I might not, if somebody is making a sexist joke or something, you know, if I shouted it out whilst they were doing it, it would just look sour grapes. But after they've finished it and everybody's had a laugh, etc., take the individual to a side and say, do you really think that was appropriate? So I think there's a time and a place, and I also recognise, you know, when I started, there was still page 3 of the Sun, and people would splash up in the workshop and in the mess rooms pictures of page 3 girls. Was it right? No. But I tell you what, I embarrassed them. I would walk in there and say, oh, that was a picture of me 5 years ago. And they would be more embarrassed than I was. And they'd end up, I know, the next day I'd go in and they would rip it down. So some of it's how you approach it, make them embarrassed about it. And that always helps achieve a behavioural change.
That's an unusual approach, but perhaps it's too much authentic to you. I mean, I also think it's really important that, you know, it's a responsibility of the most senior person in the room to be the one to call out that kind of behaviour, whether they do it privately or publicly, according to the situation. But it shouldn't be the responsibility of somebody junior to have to deal with that directly. If they choose to, of course, then, you know, for their own sake, they will want to. But it's got to be seen as the responsibility of leaders to make sure that that is dealt with effectively. We've got some link questions about pay gap in employment. So from Rafaela, the pay gap exists, we have evidence of that. What mechanisms can we employ to reduce it? Just requiring people to report on it doesn't seem to be enough. And then also from Lucy, what advice would you give to women graduating from engineering degrees this summer and looking for their first engineering role? It's obviously a really, really tough climate out there for graduates at this particular juncture. So comments on pay gap and comments on women graduating from engineering degrees looking for employment.
So the best thing I think that could happen for pay gap is make sure that organisations have transparent pay scales, so that everybody understands where they sit in that pay scale, and how they can progress through it. So if you're a senior exec on this discussion today, the one thing I will challenge back is, is it visible across everybody in your organisation how they get paid, how they, at what level they're paid at, and how do they manage to go through the pay gap, the pay grade, because that will then prompt discussion and will prompt question. And I think having that transparency takes away any gender discussion at all. You've just got to be good at your job to go through that pay grade. So I think that's really important. Remind me what the other question was.
Sure. And just to say actually that the report we did on the engineering gender pay gap absolutely confirmed what you've just said, that transparent pay scales and pay policies are a great way to make sure that your gender pay gap is reduced. So the second question was about advice for women graduating from engineering degrees at this particular point in time when it's a really, really tough job market.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I will say to you is make sure your CV looks good. Make sure, the one thing I will say to you as a senior person, when I get a CV, I look at the top half of the A4 paper, so the first piece, and I say, does that person differentiate themselves? Now, a lot of people put in a personal profile at the top, and it's a load of words, and it sounds great, but in reality, it's a lot of embellishment. Think about that really carefully, because think about what you want me to read in that first half of your first page of your CV, because that will get you, first of all, on the interview list. So that's the first thing I will say to you. The other thing I'll say to you is, look at what we're looking for as leadership traits. So we're looking at, were you in the Scouts? Were you in the, were you doing leadership roles? Do you work in teams, etc.? It's cliche, but it's really, really important because that's what we want to take to the workplace. Do I care whether you've got a 2-1 or a first? Actually, you're good at what you do, whether you've got a 2-1 or a first. And that's just a tick in the box. It's all of the other stuff that's really, really important to me as a recruiter. When you get to the interview, prepare. The amount of people that I interview that don't know about my company, I'm amazed at. And it's like, be interested in the company. You need to tell us why you want to come and work for us. And if you can get that point across on why you want to come and work for us, you will be way up there getting the job.
Great practical advice. Thanks so much, Jane. And there's a follow-on question actually that I think resonates quite nicely with that one, which is from 2 new engineering graduates called Megan and Rachel. And Megan is asking in particular how you cope with pressure and stress. So she's due to start her graduate job shortly and is concerned about that tendency to panic and cry when under pressure. Something that you might have felt happened quite a lot at uni, and then you don't want to carry that into the workplace. It's a really great kind of practical consideration that lots of us have gone through. How have you handled that, Jane?
So it's understanding your trigger points, and also it sounds really weird, but it's telling people what your trigger points are. So the reason why I say that is, these days emails, etc. I can get 400 emails a day. I'll be back-to-back meetings all day, and my work day is quite long, and sometimes I just have to have a break. So no matter what, at 9 o'clock at night, everything is switched off. And if anybody wants me, they've got an emergency number, and they know they'll be held to pay if they call that number, because it can only be for emergencies. Because I need to be able to switch off, because otherwise that stress and pressure does get to you. And I think understanding and telling people what you need to help you is very, very important. And if you do get upset for any reason, and we've all been there, I've been there, etc. Just stop what you're doing and go for a walk around the block. Nobody will criticize you if it gets you, if it gets you back to being sort of centered and prepared. Yeah. And be honest, I always carry my makeup bag with me just in case. So we've all been there over the years, but it's understanding how to deal with it that's really important.
Absolutely, I think really great practical advice again. And just remember, Megan, as Jane said, we've all been there. I think people make much too much of crying at work, and I can assure you that I have shed many tears, whether it's in the toilet or in the office or whatever it is. And I've also had many people cry in front of me. Men, women, junior, senior. It's not something we have to be ashamed of, and it shows that you care about what you're doing. And I think if you worry too much about it happening, or you worry if you have cried that it's going to somehow be this terrible, kind of toxic shadow that falls over your performance, then you're making it into a much bigger deal than it needs to be. We all have emotion. I think it's fine to be able to now and again let that be visible to your colleagues. And if you show through your work that you're really great at your job and you also happen to cry in the office, who cares? If anything, you make it easier for the other people who are swallowing their tears the whole time to know that it's actually fine. And the other thing I'd say is, find the things that really give you joy and satisfaction and strength in your work. Because, that when you start a new job, it is a stressful experience, or it can be. And if there's something you're really loving about it, it helps to offset the stress. So it's just trying to keep those sort of scales in balance between the things that might cause you that extra bit of tension and pressure and the things that really make you feel happy and strong and have that wonderful positivity and positive energy that Jane is so good at radiating. We have one last question I'm going to slip in, Jane, for you. Sujata said, "Hi Jane, you are very inspirational. I admire you." She speaks for us all. "Please do give some advice on what we need to do when we decide to change our career."
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Again, if you want to change your career, I think the first thing is you need to sit down and write down all of the positives that you either love about your current job or that you want to do or want to be involved with. Do you want to be involved with people? Do you like data? What really floats your boat? And then also write down all the negatives, because they're the things that you don't want. I wouldn't say focus on the negatives, but when you're thinking about a career change, just have a look and say, how many of the positives, how many of the negatives in that new career or that new role or that new sector or that new organisation can this job give me? And that will just help you weigh up and balance whether to move or not. Personally, I'd say go for it, try it. If it doesn't work out, just move on. It's quite, like I said earlier on, it is quite, if you've got a good technical foundation and you're good at listening to people, then you can go wherever you want. So I think don't be afraid if it doesn't work out. If 6 months in you don't enjoy it, move. Do not make yourself ill. Do not worry about it. Just move.
And I would just add to that as well that, you know, your career is obviously really, really important, but so is the particular job you're in with context of your career. So understanding which environments you thrive in, what type of organisation is the kind of place where you're going to, you know, really find it rewarding to apply your skills is super important too, because sometimes if you're unhappy, it can feel like you're in totally the wrong career, whereas it might be more to do with the people you're working with or the fact it's a big organisation or a small organisation. So there's all sorts of factors, and it comes back to really understanding yourself and knowing what makes you tick and how to get that satisfaction out of whatever it is that you're doing. Now, I led you astray. I'm so sorry, Jane. There is, in fact, one more question I'm going to sneak in here. So this is, again, an early career progression question. And so, in particular, I've got a variety here. The one I'm going to home in on is from Charlotte. Once I finish my engineering degree apprenticeship, do you feel it would be more beneficial to my career to follow on and complete a master's degree or to go and get a full-time job in industry? And I think this is a question that lots of early career people are juggling at the moment, grappling with, because the job market looks quite tough out there, and further study can be helpful. I think there is some data to say that women engineers tend to do more further study, and there are all sorts of interesting questions as to why that might be. But what would your instinct be for your world, Jane? What would be the better advice?
So there's two things for me. I think it's really important to get your master's so you can become chartered, because being a chartered engineer really is the pinnacle of your engineering career. So at some point you need to get it, whether you're in work or you do it straight after your degree. I think what I would say actually is do it in parallel, is apply for jobs whilst starting your master's. Because if you get a job interview, ask the company, would they sponsor you to do your master's? What might happen is they might do it over 2 years, so you might have to switch from a full-time to a part-time. But the reason why I say this is a lot of companies do actually still sponsor students and will pay for you to do your masters, but they don't advertise it, etc. So actually, I would do it in parallel. But also it doesn't hurt, because even if they don't want to pay for your masters and you carry on and do that year, you've started engaging a company in a discussion, and they actually might say to you, well, we can't take you on this year anyway, but we really like you, we'll take you on next year after you've finished your masters. So for me, I think that is really, really important, and I would write to lots of companies. I mean, I did this during my degree, so I was sponsored by British Steel during my degree, and I wrote to lots and lots of companies at the time, telling them why I really, really wanted to work for them, and I was lucky to get sponsorship, and a lot of companies still do that. So I would encourage you, again, if you don't ask, you never get.
Fantastic, Jane. You've been absolutely phenomenal, as I knew you would be. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I don't know how anybody could fail to be inspired and motivated and fired up by what you've been talking about. Your personal story is just incredible, and you know, in some respects you've told us some quite hair-raising experiences, but I see, you know, in a way someone like you as being at the tip of the icebreaker, having had almost that, you know, kind of toughest experience of trying to create the possibility for further change. And I think lots of us will benefit from the fantastic journey that you've been on towards transformational leadership. And it's absolutely brilliant that you've been so open, so candid with us, given us loads of practical tips, as well as talking about your kind of personal journey as well. So thank you so, so much. We're going to close with a polling question. So at the start of this, 67% of you were convinced that there was a glass ceiling. And I'm now going to see if the kind of optimism levels are rising. And we're going to ask you how confident you feel about influencing positive change on diversity and inclusion in your organisation. So again, if you can click on the polling icon, you should be able to answer that question. You can say that you're very confident, you're somewhat confident, or you're not at all confident. The question is, once again, how confident do you feel about influencing positive change on diversity and inclusion in your organisation? And we'll give you just a few seconds to share your thoughts on that. And then we're going to draw things to a close. I could have gone on talking for ages, Jane, and there were so many questions coming in. It's been really good fun, actually, listening to you. And as I said, super, super inspirational story that you've just shared with us. So hopefully very shortly we're going to be able to share the results of the polling. Excellent, I think we're nearly there. And I'll just say that we will send everyone a follow-up email. Everyone who's joined us, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know that you have many reasons to stare at screens all day long, so thank you so much for choosing this reason. And so we're going to take a quick look at the answer. I believe the slide might be ready now. Perfect. Okay. So that's actually a pretty good positive message to end on, actually. And once again, the Academy has lots of resources available. So 27% of you are very confident, 31% of you are confident, 14% of you are somewhat confident. And then, actually, I think it's not percentages, is it? Sorry, it's actual numbers. So you can certainly find out more on our website, lots of D&I resources there. And we'll send you some links to useful resources when we send our follow-up email. So all of you, thank you so much for joining, and in particular our guest speaker. Virtual round of applause for you, Jane. We've really enjoyed your company.
Thank you.
We wish you every success, and I hope you all have a very good rest of your International Women in Engineering Day 2020. Please do go on being part of this campaign to shape the world. You're all important, and we're grateful for your efforts. Thanks, everybody, and have a good afternoon.